and then suggesting that you're a victim without evidence and that I have victimized you because I won't accept your victimhood, this makes the country a worse place. So I want to go briefly through a couple of the intersectional hierarchy groups, people who feel they're victims in American society, and explain why you are not in fact a victim, why you need to take control of your own life and become an adult. So let's start with the idea that poor people in America are victimized. And this is sort of the Bernie Sanders case. Income inequality is the root of all evil. This is Antifa's case that communism or anarchism would be a better solution than, say, a free and civil society that's raised half the world out of abject poverty. Right? Income inequality is not the big problem. Nobody rich is making you poor. Bill Gates did not make you poor. Bill Gates provided you a product, and if you bought it, that is your fault. Okay, the upper middle class grew from 12% of Americans in 1979 to 30% as of 2014. That is a massive growth in the upper middle class. The rich are not making you poorer. They are paying your salary. American income mobility, by the way, is just as strong as European countries with far more redistribution. Income mobility drops only when you drop out of high school or you have a baby out of wedlock. Okay, this is what makes you poor. Okay, how about the idea that if you're black in America, there's a white supremacist hierarchy that is keeping you down? Now listen, you'd be a fool not to acknowledge, or a liar, not to acknowledge the history of racism in America. Everybody acknowledges that if you have half a brain. Of course, slavery, Jim Crow, awful, evil treatment at the hands of awful, evil people. We all acknowledge this. We all acknowledge the collective sin of the United States in promulgating this, and the individual sins, more importantly, of the people who actually promulgated this stuff. Okay, we all get that. But that's not what we're talking about. Now we're talking about now. Because I wasn't born when Jim Crow was in place. I wasn't an adult when Jim Crow was in place. I know that I'm not a racist, and I know I haven't acted in a racist manner. And I would bet you money that the people in this room haven't acted in a racist manner, that they haven't held slaves or voted for Jim Crow. I will bet you money that is the case. You cannot fix past injustices with current injustices. The only way to fix past injustices is with individual freedom. That's it. Okay, the idea that black people in the United States are disproportionately poor because America is racist, that's just not true. At least not in terms of America's racism today keeping black people down. It's just not the case. If that were the case, then you'd have to look at group income and decide based on group income who's been victimized the most and who the country was built for. Well, by that standard, the country was built by Asians. Okay, because the racial group with the highest median income in the United States is Asians. The Constitution was not written by a bunch of people who speak Korean, because the Constitution is a document of freedom, not a document of ethnicity. So here are the three rules. You want to be rich in America? You want to do well in America? You want to put aside the whining about the system? Again, you point out to me an individual instance of racism, I will stand next to you and fight it. But if you want to whine about America, no good. Okay, here are the three rules that you need to fulfill as a person before you can start complaining about your life failures being the result of somebody else's actions. Number one, you need to finish high school. Number two, you need to get married before you have babies. Number three, you need to get a job. That's it. You do those things, you will not be permanently poor in the United States of America. According to the Brookings Institute, 2% of Americans who followed these rules are in poverty. 75% have joined the middle class. Well, what about racism? 71% of poor families with children are unmarried. The poverty rate among non-married white families was 22% in 2008. That same year, the poverty rate among black married couples was less than 7%. But what happened to racism? Why weren't those black married couples poorer than the single white moms? Because it didn't have to do with color. It has to do with life decisions. And we can talk about differentials in crime and where these statistics come from. I mean, the basic rule is that if you don't commit crime, you're not going to be arrested for it. The police are not going around arresting black people for the fun of it. They're going around arresting criminals based on criminal reports, which is why the number of criminal reports based on race matches up exactly with the number of criminal arrests based on race. Okay, if you don't report people for crime, it's hard for the police to know to pick them up. Okay, how about women? This idea that women are vastly victimized in our society. Hillary Clinton is making buco dollars off of this nonsense this week. As I tweeted earlier this week we found out that a clown can emerge from the woods and scare half of Americans, and also it came out. But Hillary Clinton is going around whining about how there's a glass ceiling and she couldn't break through it and it's all because of sexism. It's not because she was the world's worst candidate and a pretty appalling human being. No, it was because everybody is a sexist. Everybody's a sexist. And we hear in this context very much about the wage gap, right? The idea that women are paid significantly less than men, 72 cents on the dollar. Okay, that's absolute sheer nonsense. It is absolute nonsense. In 147 out of 150 of the biggest cities in America, women make 8% more money than men do in their peer group. That wage gap is growing, not shrinking. At colleges, 55% of women in college are women. That gap is getting larger. 58% of all graduate degrees go to women. Okay, the majority of voters are women. If we are living in a place where women are vastly victimized by men, I'd really like to see that place. And as far as this idea that there's a vast rape epidemic going on campus, every rape, as I have said 1,000 times, every rape should be dealt with by the prosecution of the rapist, ending with their jailing, castration, or death. Okay, that's how I feel about rape. But this nonsense statistic that's been presented that 1 in 5 women on college campuses is being raped is just not true. It's just not true. The actual statistic, according to the Department of Justice, is something like 1 in every 58. Obviously far too high, but not 1 in 5. If you're 1 in 5, by the way, if you're a woman at this campus, you should go to your parents and ask them what kind of nuts they are to send you in a war zone where you're likely to be raped. Okay. How about the idea that gays and lesbians are really living under the boot of American society? Well, in terms of income, they certainly aren't. Okay, certainly not in terms of income. Women in lesbian couples make far more money than women in straight couples do. Men in gay couples make slightly less than men in straight couples, but same-sex couples with both partners in the labor force make $8,000 more per year than straight couples, and they are typically higher educated. Okay, so that talks about the identity politics, this intersectional hierarchy of the left. But there's another group that engages in identity politics that I want to talk about now. And it's the battle between the identity politics of the left and the identity politics of the so-called alt-right that is really making the country a significantly worse place, and it needs to stop now because it is utter and complete horrible bullshit. The first thing to note, this notion that the alt-right is actually conservative is nonsense. Let me define what I mean by alt-right, because not everybody who likes Pepe memes or Harambe memes is a member of the alt-right. Okay, not everybody that the left says is alt-right is actually alt-right. I mean, the left calls me alt-right, which is patently insane. I mean, you legitimately have to have a screw loose to call me alt-right. I spend half my career attacking the alt-right. Okay, what is the alt-right? So the alt-right are a group of people who believe that ideology and ethnicity are inextricably intertwined, just like the identity politics left, right? On the identity politics left, if you're a black person who is a leftist, you're a leftist because you're a black person. On the identity politics right, Western civilization was not built by people with good ideas, it was built by people with white skin. And that means that people who don't have white skin cannot properly assimilate into Western civilization. This has no grounding in reality. The fact is that there were lots of white people in Britain before the Romans arrived, and they weren't living a civilized life, as we would currently call it, under Western civilization. Okay? In fact, the people who, the Romans, right, when Italians were coming to the United States in the early part of the 20th century, there was tremendous discrimination against Italians because they weren't considered properly white. The definition of white moves around a lot based on convenience. Right? Sometimes Jews are white, sometimes Jews are not white. It sort of depends on what you're talking about. But according to the alt-right, because ideology and race are inextricably intertwined, they must have a white identity politics all their own. If there's a group of people who are fighting for the group identity politics of blacks, or of women, or of gays and lesbians, then there has to be a white group that fights back on behalf of the white race. As you may have noticed, I think all of this is disgusting. Okay, Western civilization is not built on race. There have been lots of countries all over Europe that were not particularly civilized and were quite white. Freedom, personal responsibility, separation of powers, God-given rights protected by a government elected with the consent of the government. These are the values of Western civilization. But the alt-right actually overtly rejects these ideas. They say the Constitution is outmoded, that it doesn't work. They say that government for white people is necessary and good because you can't assimilate people to so-called white culture. They hang out with neo-Nazis because a lot of them actually believe some of the same things that the neo-Nazis believe. White supremacy. Now, let's be straight about this. This is like 10,000 people across the country. Yeah, this is not 1 million people, this is not 10 million people, this is not 63 million people, it's not 200 million deplorables. It's a very small select group of absolutely terrible people who believe absolutely terrible things. But they're getting a lot of attention and coverage right now because we live in a reactionary moment. A lot of the people are reacting to the identity politics of the left by making nice with the alt-right. There's this weird notion on the right that if you drink leftist tears, that's enough. Right? Drinking leftist tears is enough. So if the alt-right ticks off the left, they're fine. Okay, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. I have no other word for it. Okay, you actually have to stand. It is not enough to stand against bad ideologies. You must also stand for a good ideology. You must stand for a good philosophy. Okay, you cannot stand with bad people just because you think those bad people make your enemies cry. The enemy of your enemy in a country where we're all supposed to be friends is not only bad strategy, it destroys the country wholesale. So, how do we solve all this, right? We're on campus and we're hearing the identity politics of the left, and then you watch the news and you see the identity politics of the alt-right. How do you solve all of this? Well, the way that you solve all of this, first of all, let's start with the campus thuggery. The way you solve all that is by letting the police do their jobs. Okay? Administrators need to let the police do their jobs. None of this would have gone anywhere if back in February, when Milo, who I significantly dislike, when Milo came to speak, if they had allowed the police to do their jobs and arrest everyone who even hinted at violence. Okay, people who get violent should be arrested and they should spend time in jail. And the authorities have a responsibility to allow the police to do their jobs. And this is not the fault of the cops. This is the fault of cowardly political actors who, pusillanimous cowards, who hide behind their desks every time some people on the left whine a little bit. Okay, the second thing that has to happen is you have to stop seeing everybody in America as an enemy who despises you based on identity. Again, they don't care about you. You're not that important a human. Okay, not that many of us know each other. Not that many of us care about each other. We care about our families. We care about our friends. And we certainly don't want to stop each other. We mostly want to be treated civilly. And we can all do that if we stop looking into each other's eyes and seeing a potential enemy instead of seeing somebody who's just a person who probably doesn't care about you very much and doesn't want to stop you and doesn't mind what you do. This is not difficult stuff. And finally, stop seeing yourself as a victim, because in order to see everybody else as an enemy, which justifies your violence and hate against them, you have to see yourself as their victim. Again, America is the greatest country in human history. You are not a victim. If you are a victim of something, you need to show me what you are a victim of, and I will stand beside you. But do not blame the freest, most civil society in the history of planet Earth for your failures, because that's on you. Now, is that so rough? I mean, did we need $600,000 of security to hear all of that? I have a feeling the vast majority of people who are protesting this speech have never heard of me. I'm not arrogant enough to believe that Antifa sits around watching Thug Life videos. If they did, I doubt they would be members of Antifa. But the idea that they're out there protesting, they're out there maybe getting violent, apparently 4 people have been arrested for carrying weapons already. The idea that all that is happening is indicative of the fact that we have stopped seeing each other as individuals. We are all individuals. I'm an individual with a particular point of view. I am not a cardboard cutout for you to call a white supremacist. I am not a cardboard cutout for you to call a Nazi. And neither is anybody else in this room. Get to know people. Get to know their views. Discuss. Debate. That is what America is all about.